The dust settled around Eleanor Garrett's boots as she stood in the doorway of her late husband's mercantile, watching Thomas Murphy clutch his hat between weathered hands, tears streaming down his sun-beaten face. It was August 1879 in Porterville, California, and the summer heat had driven most sensible folk indoors, but Thomas had nowhere else to go, no shade that could shelter him from the storm brewing in his life. "Mrs. Garrett, I know what I owe," Thomas said, his voice breaking. $300 for the seed, the tools, everything you and your husband fronted me last spring. But the drought took it all. My wife is sick, real sick, and the doctor won't see her again until I settle his bill too. I am begging you, just give me until next harvest. I will work double. I will do anything. Eleanor looked at the ledger in her hands, at her husband's neat script documenting every transaction from the past 5 years. Gerald had been dead only 3 months, taken by pneumonia before the spring warmth could fully settle into the valley. She was 24 years old, suddenly responsible for a business she had only helped run from the shadows, and everyone in town was watching to see if a woman could manage what her husband had built. The sensible thing, the thing every merchant in California would do, was to demand payment or seize Thomas's land as collateral. His 40 acres bordered the creek and would be worth something even in a drought. But Eleanor looked at Thomas's face, saw the same desperation she had felt watching Gerald struggle for breath in their bedroom, and something inside her shifted. "Thomas," she said quietly, "take your ledger page." She tore the sheet from the book, the paper making a sharp sound in the still air. Thomas stared at her, not understanding. "What are you doing?" "Forgiving your debt," Eleanor said. "All of it. Take care of your wife. When times are better, if you want to shop here again, you will be welcome. But you owe me nothing." Thomas's legs seemed to give out. He sank onto the wooden step, the torn ledger page fluttering from his shaking hands. "I cannot. Mrs. Garrett, this is not. Nobody does this." "Well, I just did," Eleanor said, feeling something like peace settle over her shoulders despite the heat. "Go on home, Thomas. Be with your family." She did not see the cowboy leaning against the post office wall across the street, but Harold Quinn saw everything. Harold had ridden into Porterville that morning on a stolen horse. He told himself he had only borrowed. With $40 in his pocket, he had won in a card game he might have cheated at, though he was not entirely sure his own sleight of hand had been necessary since the other players were so drunk. He was 26 years old, had been running from one thing or another since he was 16, and had convinced himself that survival justified whatever small sins he accumulated along the way. He had come to Porterville because it was far enough from Sacramento that nobody would know about the incident with the banker's daughter, or the misunderstanding with his former employer about the missing payroll money that Harold had definitely meant to put back before anyone noticed. The San Joaquin Valley was full of ranches needing hands, and Harold was good with horses, good with a rope, and good at making people like him just long enough for him to move on before they figured out who he really was. But watching Eleanor Garrett tear up that debt, watching her choose mercy when she could have chosen profit, something twisted in Harold's chest like a knife finding its mark. He had never seen anything like it. Harold pushed off from the post office wall and walked across the dusty street toward the mercantile. Eleanor had gone back inside, and through the window he could see her returning the ledger to its place beneath the counter. The store was dim and cool compared to the blazing street, and when Harold stepped inside, he had to blink to adjust his eyes. Eleanor looked up from the counter. "Can I help you?" She was prettier than Harold had realized from across the street. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her dress was simple calico, faded from washing but clean and well-mended. But it was her eyes that caught him, brown and direct, the kind of eyes that seemed to look right through whatever facade a person put up. Harold said, suddenly forgetting the smooth introduction he had planned. I need some supplies. Just rode into town looking for work. Ranch hand? Eleanor asked, already moving toward the shelves where she kept work gloves and rope. Yes, madam. Good with horses, cattle, pretty much anything that needs doing. Eleanor began pulling items down, her movements efficient. The Morrison Ranch is hiring, about 6 miles north of town. Old man Morrison is fair if you work hard, but he does not tolerate drinking or gambling. Harold felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the temperature. I will keep that in mind. You will need a bedroll if you do not have one. Morrison provides meals for his hands, but you will be sleeping in the bunkhouse. I have a bedroll, Harold lied. He had sold his last one in Fresno for drinking money. Eleanor looked at him with those knowing eyes. The nights get cold once the sun goes down, even in summer. Desert cold. You will want good blankets. Harold looked at the blankets she indicated. They were quality wool, probably $3 at least. He had $40, but that had to last until he got work and his first pay, which could be a month away. Maybe just the work gloves for now, he said. Eleanor wrapped the gloves in brown paper and tied them with string. 50 cents. As Harold counted out the coins, he could not stop himself from asking, "That man earlier, you really just forgave his whole debt?" Eleanor's hands paused on the counter. "You saw that?" "I did not mean to spy. I was just across the street and—" "Thomas Murphy is a good man who had bad luck," Eleanor said. "Punishing him for the drought would not bring my husband back or make my ledgers any healthier. Sometimes mercy is worth more than money." Harold took his wrapped gloves, feeling like a fraud touching anything this woman had handled. "That is a kind way of looking at it. It is the only way I can look at it and still sleep at night," Eleanor said. "Will you need anything else?" Harold should have left then, should have taken his gloves and ridden straight to the Morrison Ranch and never looked back. But instead he heard himself say, "I am Harold Quinn, just in case you need to know who bought these gloves." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Eleanor Garrett, welcome to Porterville, Mr. Quinn." Harold rode out to the Morrison Ranch that afternoon and got hired on the spot. The ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of valley grassland, with cattle grazing on what remained of the summer feed and horses in the corrals that Harold could tell had good bloodlines. Old man Morrison was actually only about 50, but his face was so weathered by sun and hard work that he looked 70, and his handshake could crack walnuts. "Quinn, you say?" Morrison looked Harold up and down. "You know your way around a horse?" "Yes, sir." "Been working ranches since I was a boy." "Where you from originally?" Harold had learned to keep his answers vague. "Up north. Moved around a lot." Morrison nodded, accepting this. Half the men in California had pasts they did not discuss. "Pay is $30 a month plus meals." "You work sunrise to sunset. Sunday mornings off for church if you are inclined, but you still do the essential work, feeding and watering. No drinking in the bunkhouse, no fighting, and if I catch you cheating at cards, you are done." "Clear, clear, sir." "Good. Bunkhouse is behind the barn." "Supper is at 6. We have a horse with colic in the south stable. You can start by helping Martinez walk her." Harold spent the rest of the day learning the rhythm of the ranch, meeting the other hands, and walking a miserable mare in circles while she worked the gas out of her system. By the time supper came around, he was dusty, tired, and feeling almost honest for the first time in months. But that night, lying in his borrowed bunk with no blanket because the one provided was thin and inadequate, Harold kept thinking about Eleanor Garrett tearing up that ledger page. In town, Eleanor was doing her own accounting. The mercantile had been doing well enough when Gerald was alive, but 3 months of uncertain management while everyone waited to see what the widow would do had cost her customers. Some had started going to the general store in Chalair, making the longer trip because they did not trust a woman to keep proper inventory or calculate their credit correctly. Eleanor had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of a shipping clerk who had taught her mathematics because he had no sons and needed someone to help with his books. She had married Harold Garrett when she was 19, drawn by his ambition and kindness, and moved to the San Joaquin Valley expecting adventure. What she had found was hard work, brutal summers, and a community that did not quite know what to make of an educated woman who could calculate compound interest in her head. Harold had loved her, though. He had valued her mind, asked her opinion, and slowly, carefully, taught her every aspect of running the mercantile. She knew where he bought inventory, how much freight cost, which customers paid on time and which needed gentle reminders. She knew the business as well as he had, but nobody else seemed to believe it. Forgiving Thomas Murphy's debt had been an impulse, but it had also been a calculation. Word would spread that Eleanor Garrett had shown mercy, that she was not some grasping widow trying to squeeze every penny from her husband's customers. Maybe it would cost her in the short term, but in the long term, it might buy her something more valuable than $300. It might buy her credibility. She closed the ledger and looked around the empty store. The silence was oppressive. Harold should be here, making his jokes about difficult customers, planning their future. Instead, she was alone, trying to figure out how to build a life from the wreckage of the one she had lost. Harold rode into town the following Saturday, his first week's work behind him and a powerful thirst competing with his curiosity. Morrison had paid him an advance of $5 against his first month's wages, and Harold knew he should save it. But he also knew there was a saloon in Porterville, and the week had been long and hot. He tied his horse, one of Morrison's old geldings he was allowed to use, outside the saloon, and was about to go in when he saw Eleanor Garrett across the street, struggling with a crate being unloaded from a freight wagon. The freight driver was no help, already back up on his wagon seat and gathering his reins. "That is the last of it, Mrs. Garrett. My manifest is done. But this crate is too heavy for me to move alone," Eleanor protested. "Can you not at least help me get it inside?" "Not in my job description, madam. You want something moved, hire someone to move it." The wagon rolled away, leaving Eleanor standing in the street with a crate that probably weighed as much as she did. Harold forgot about the saloon. He crossed the street in 4 long strides. "Mrs. Garrett, I can help with that." Eleanor looked up, surprise crossing her face. "Mr. Quinn, you do not have to. It is no trouble." Harold bent and tested the weight of the crate. It was full of canned goods, heavy but manageable. He lifted it with a grunt and followed Eleanor into the mercantile. "Where do you want it?" "In the back, please. Against the far wall." Harold maneuvered through the narrow store, trying not to knock anything over, and set the crate down where Eleanor indicated. When he straightened, she was watching him with that same direct gaze that made him feel transparent. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. That would have taken me half an hour and probably a hernia. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Harold said. "Just being neighborly. You are working at Morrison's?" "Yes, madam. Been there a week now." "And how are you finding it?" Harold found himself smiling. "Hard work, but honest. Morrison is a fair boss." "He is," Eleanor agreed. She moved to the counter and opened a jar of peppermint sticks. "Here for your trouble." "You do not have to pay me in candy, Mrs. Garrett. It is not payment, it is a thank you. There is a difference." Harold took the peppermint stick, feeling absurdly pleased. "Well, thank you then." He should have left. He had done his good deed and the saloon was still waiting. But instead he found himself asking, "How is business?" If you do not mind me asking. Eleanor's expression clouded slightly. Improving. Slowly. People are cautious about dealing with a widow, but I am proving I can manage. Anyone who saw what you did for Thomas Murphy knows you are more than capable, Harold said before he could think better of it. You keep bringing that up. Because it stuck with me, Harold admitted. I have never seen anyone do something like that, just erase a debt like it never existed. Eleanor leaned against the counter, studying him. Why does it matter so much to you? The honest answer was too complicated, too revealing. It mattered because Harold had spent 10 years believing that mercy was weakness, that looking out for yourself was the only way to survive, and Eleanor had shattered that belief in a single moment. It mattered because he was standing in this mercantile with stolen money in his pocket and a borrowed horse outside, and for the first time he felt ashamed of it. I guess I am just not used to people being kind without expecting something back, he said finally. Then you have been spending time with the wrong people, Mr. Quinn. Harold, he said. You can call me Harold. Then you should call me Eleanor. Mrs. Garrett makes me sound like my mother-in-law. Harold left the mercantile that afternoon without ever going to the saloon. He rode back to Morrison's ranch with a peppermint stick in his pocket and a strange lightness in his chest that felt almost like hope. Over the next few weeks, Harold found excuses to go into Porterville more often than necessary. He told himself it was because the town had better supplies than what Morrison kept at the ranch, or because he needed to check if there was mail for him even though nobody knew he was in Porterville. But the truth was he wanted to see Eleanor. She was always working when he stopped by the mercantile, her sleeves rolled up despite the heat, her hair escaping its pins by afternoon. She never seemed surprised to see him, just looked up from whatever she was doing and smiled like his arrival was the most natural thing in the world. Harold. What can I do for you today? I need some tobacco for Martinez. He is out and getting cranky. Rolling tobacco or plug, rolling. He is particular about it. Eleanor pulled down a tin and set it on the counter. Anything else? Harold knew he should leave, but he found himself lingering. How has your week been? Busy, actually. I just got in a shipment of fabric and 3 ladies have already been by to look at it. If I sell half of what I ordered, I will be ahead for the month. That is good news. It is. Eleanor counted out his change with quick, practiced movements. And how is the ranch? Same as always. Cows eat, horses need breaking, fences need mending. Morrison has me working with the new colts, which I like. They are smarter than the cows. Eleanor laughed, and the sound did something pleasant to Harold's insides. Most things are smarter than cows. True enough. He took his tobacco and change but hesitated at the door. Eleanor, if you ever need help again with freight or heavy lifting or anything, you could let me know. I do not mind. That is kind of you, Harold. I will keep it in mind. Harold walked out into the afternoon heat feeling like a fool and not caring. He was 26 years old and acting like a boy with his first crush. But Eleanor Garrett had gotten under his skin in a way he could not explain and did not want to shake off. The problem was his past, which was never as far behind him as he wanted it to be. In September, a man named Dutch Keller rode into Porterville asking questions about a cowboy who matched Harold's description. Dutch was a bounty hunter, though he preferred to call himself a private investigator, and he had been hired by a banker in Sacramento to find the man who had run off with his daughter, and incidentally, $200 from the banker's safe. Harold heard about Dutch from Martinez, who heard it from his cousin who worked at the saloon. By the time the news reached Harold, Dutch had already shown Eleanor a sketch that looked enough like Harold to make his stomach drop when Martinez described it. The widow told him she did not know anyone like that, Martinez said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. But Dutch is asking all over town. Harold felt the familiar urge to run, to saddle up and ride out before anyone could corner him. But this time, something held him back. He thought about Eleanor's face when she had torn up Thomas Murphy's debt. He thought about her saying that mercy was worth more than money. He thought about the fact that he was tired of running. That evening, instead of fleeing, Harold rode into town and went straight to the mercantile. Eleanor was closing up, pulling down the shades and locking the cash box. She looked surprised to see him. "Harold, is everything all right?" "No," Harold said. "Can we talk, privately?" Eleanor studied his face and must have seen something there that concerned her, because she nodded and locked the front door behind them. "Come into the back." The back room of the mercantile was small and crowded with inventory, but there was a desk where Gerald had done his accounting and 2 chairs. Eleanor lit a lamp against the gathering darkness and sat down, gesturing for Harold to do the same. "What is wrong?" Harold sat, his hat in his hands, trying to figure out how to say what needed saying. "There is a man in town asking about me, a bounty hunter named Dutch Keller." Eleanor's expression did not change. "I met him this afternoon. He had a sketch. And did you recognize me?" "The sketch could have been anyone. It could have been you or a dozen other cowboys I have seen. But you knew it was me." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I suspected." Harold felt something crumble inside him. "I am not a bad man, Eleanor, or I am trying not to be. But I have made mistakes and I have done things I am not proud of." "What did you do?" "In Sacramento, there was this banker's daughter. Her name was Charlotte. We met at a dance and she was so pretty and so bored with her life. We started seeing each other in secret, and she had this idea that we should run away together, start fresh somewhere new. I told her it was foolish, but she kept pushing, and one night she came to my room with money she had taken from her father's safe." Harold stopped, the memory making him sick. "I did not ask her to steal it, Eleanor. I swear I did not. But she had it, and she was standing there telling me we could leave that very night, and I took it. I let her believe we were running away together. And then, in the middle of the night, while she was sleeping, I took the money and left. I left her there, in a boarding house in a strange part of the city, with nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating." Harold could not look at Eleanor, could not bear to see disgust or disappointment in her face. "Did you love her?" Eleanor asked finally. "No," Harold said. "I liked her, but I did not love her. I just wanted the money, and I told myself it did not matter because she was rich and her father could afford it. I told myself a lot of things to make it all right in my head. And now I know I was a coward and a thief, and Charlotte probably got punished for what I did, and her father wants me found and jailed, and I have spent 2 months running from it." Eleanor stood and walked to the small window that looked out onto the alley behind the mercantile. Harold watched her back, rigid in the lamplight, and wondered if this was the last time they would talk. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked. "Because I am tired of lying, and because you deserve to know who you have been nice to. You forgave Thomas Murphy's debt, and I saw that and thought maybe, if I could be better, if I could be honest, you might." He could not finish the sentence. It was too presumptuous, too revealing. Eleanor turned around, and in the lamplight he could see tears on her cheeks. "You thought I might forgive you too?" "Yes. Harold, what you did was wrong. Taking that money, leaving that girl, all of it was wrong, I know. But you are here telling me the truth when you could have run. That means something." Harold felt something loosen in his chest. "Dutch Keller is going to figure out who I am eventually. Someone will recognize me, or I will make a mistake. When that happens, I will have to face what I did." "Yes, you will." Eleanor came back and sat down across from him. "But facing it is different than running from it. If you are serious about being better, about making amends, then you need to do it properly." "How?" "First, you give the money back, all of it. You write to that banker in Sacramento and you tell him where to find his money. Harold flinched. I do not have all of it anymore. I spent some and I lost some gambling. Then you pay back what you can and you work off the rest. You make it right, Harold, no matter how long it takes. And the girl, Charlotte, you write to her too. You apologize properly and you make it clear that what happened was not her fault. You take responsibility. Harold nodded slowly. The thought of putting it all down in writing, of admitting everything, terrified him. But Eleanor was looking at him with something that might have been hope, and he found he could not disappoint her. What about Dutch Keller? You tell him the truth. You tell him you are ready to make things right. If he wants to take you to Sacramento, then you go. If they want to jail you, then you accept it. But you stop running, Harold. You face what you did. Will you still? Harold could not finish. It was too much to ask. Will I still what? Will you still talk to me after all this? Eleanor reached across the desk and took his hand. Her fingers were small and work-roughened but warm. I saw you help Thomas Murphy that day, even though you had no reason to. I have watched you come in here week after week, being kind and helpful. Whatever you did in your past, I believe you are trying to be better. And yes, Harold, I will still talk to you. Harold held her hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. I do not deserve your kindness. None of us deserve mercy, Harold. That is what makes it mercy. That night, Harold wrote 2 letters. The first was to Charlotte's father, explaining everything, apologizing and enclosing $35, which was all he had left after paying for the postage and buying the paper and ink from Eleanor. He promised to send more as he earned it, every month, until the full amount plus interest was repaid. The second letter was to Charlotte. That one was harder. Harold wrote 5 drafts before he had something that felt honest without being self-serving. He apologized for betraying her trust, for taking advantage of her naivety, for leaving her in that boarding house. He told her that none of it was her fault, that he had been selfish and cruel, and that he hoped she would find happiness despite what he had done. He posted both letters the next morning and then went looking for Dutch Keller. Dutch was in the saloon, drinking bad whiskey and questioning the bartender. He was a lean man with cold eyes and a 6-shooter on his hip that he wore like he knew how to use it. When Harold walked in and said his name, Dutch looked him up and down and said nothing. "You are looking for me," Harold said. "About the business in Sacramento. So you are the one. I thought so when I saw you across the street yesterday. I wrote to the banker. Send him back what money I have left and promise to pay the rest. If you want to take me to Sacramento to face charges, I will go." Dutch studied him for a long moment. "You know I could collect a reward for bringing you in." "I know. But you are here anyway, turning yourself in." "I am tired of running." Dutch drained his whiskey and stood. "I will wire the banker, let him know I found you. But if you already sent the money back and you are willing to make restitution, he might decide pressing charges is not worth the trouble. Men like him care more about getting their money back than seeing justice done. And if he does want me brought in, then I will come back for you and you will go peacefully." "Yes, sir." Dutch tipped his hat and walked out of the saloon, leaving Harold standing there feeling like he had just jumped off a cliff and was waiting to see if he would hit bottom or somehow learn to fly. The response from Sacramento came 3 weeks later. The banker, it turned out, was more interested in discretion than prosecution. Charlotte had told everyone she had been robbed, protecting both her reputation and her father's business from scandal. As long as Harold repaid the full amount plus 20% interest, no charges would be filed. Harold showed the letter to Eleanor in the back room of the Mercantile, his hands shaking. "I cannot believe it." "I can," Eleanor said. "Powerful men do not like their dirty laundry aired. He is probably relieved you are willing to pay quietly." It will take me 2 years to pay off this much, even with interest. Then you will work for 2 years, Eleanor said. Or longer, if that is what it takes. Harold looked at her, at this woman who had shown him what real strength looked like, and felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he might actually become someone worth knowing. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. What is it? When I saw you forgive Thomas Murphy's debt that day, something changed in me. I have been drifting for 10 years, telling myself that being clever was the same as being smart, that taking shortcuts was just survival. But watching you choose mercy over profit, it made me realize I have been wrong about everything. Eleanor was very still. What are you saying, Harold? I am saying that I want to be the kind of man who deserves your respect. I want to be honest and hardworking and good. I want to be the kind of man who you might. He could not get the words out, terrified of saying too much. Eleanor crossed the small space between them and put her hand on his chest over his heart. Harold Quinn, are you trying to tell me you have feelings for me? Yes, Harold said, the word coming out rough. I know I have got no right, given everything, but I cannot help it. You are the finest person I have ever met, and every time I see you I feel like maybe I could be better just by being near you. You are already better, Eleanor said softly. You proved that when you stopped running. Does that mean? It means I have feelings for you too, you foolish man. Why do you think I have been finding excuses to keep you in my store longer every time you visit? Harold felt like his heart might burst. Really, really. Eleanor smiled, and it was like sunrise after a long night. But Harold, we need to do this properly. You need to court me like a gentleman, and I need to rebuild my business, and we both need time to figure out who we are separate from who we were. I can do proper, Harold said. I can do gentleman. Good. Then you can start by taking me to church on Sunday. Harold had not been to church in 8 years, but he nodded immediately. Yes, madam. Eleanor laughed and stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. This is going to be an interesting courtship, Harold Quinn. The best kind, Harold agreed. Courting Eleanor Garrett while working at Morrison's ranch and paying off his debt turned out to be the hardest and best thing Harold had ever done. Every Sunday, he rode into town cleaned up and wearing his one good shirt, and they went to the small Protestant church where Eleanor had sat alone for 3 months after Gerald's death. The congregation eyed Harold with suspicion at first, this ranch hand courting the respectable widow, but he won them over slowly through steady attendance and obvious devotion to Eleanor. After church, they would walk through town or sit in the small park by the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about growing up in San Francisco, about her father's shipping business and her mother's death when Eleanor was 12. She told him about meeting Gerald at a church social, about their courtship and marriage, about building a life in the San Joaquin Valley. Did you love him? Harold asked once, then immediately regretted it. I am sorry, that is not my business. It is all right, Eleanor said. They were sitting under a cottonwood tree, the October sun warm on their faces. Yes, I loved Gerald. He was a good man, kind and patient. But we married young, and if I am honest, I think we grew to love each other rather than falling in love. It was comfortable and safe, and I thought that was enough. And now, Eleanor looked at him with those direct brown eyes. Now I know the difference. What I feel for you, Harold, it is not comfortable or safe. It terrifies me how much I care about you. But it is real, more real than anything I have felt before. Harold took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I feel the same way, like I have been asleep my whole life and just woke up. They kissed under that cottonwood tree, gentle and sweet, and Harold felt like he was finally home. But life in the San Joaquin Valley was never simple. In November, an early cold snap killed half of Morrison's calves, and the ranch had to let two hands go to save money. Harold was kept on because of his skill with horses, but his wages were cut to $20 a month, which meant paying off his debt would take even longer. Then, in December, Eleanor's mercantile nearly burned down when a lamp was knocked over during a windstorm. The fire was caught quickly, but the smoke damage was extensive, and Eleanor had to close for 2 weeks while she cleaned and repaired everything. The lost revenue put her behind on her supplier payments, and for the first time since Gerald's death, she faced the real possibility of losing the business. Harold wanted to help, but he had nothing to give. Every penny he earned went to Sacramento, to slowly chipping away at his debt. He felt helpless, watching Eleanor struggle, knowing he was courting a woman he could not provide for. "Maybe I should not be courting you," he said one Sunday in January 1880, the words bitter in his mouth. "You need someone who can help you, who has something to offer. All I have got is a broken past and a debt that will take years to clear." Eleanor looked at him across the table in her kitchen, where she had made them lunch after church. "Harold Quinn, if you think I care about money, you have not been paying attention. It is not about caring about money, it is about being practical. You are trying to save your business, and here I am, broke and useless. You are not useless. You are one of the best men I know. That is not enough to pay bills." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "Gerald left me the business, but he also left me 10 acres of land north of town. I have been thinking about selling it to raise money, but I have not wanted to. It was supposed to be where we built our home someday." Harold felt his chest tighten. "You should not have to sell your land." "Maybe I should not have to, but maybe I need to. That is part of life, Harold. We do what we have to do. There has to be another way. If you think of one, I am listening." Harold thought about it all through the next week, working Morrison's horses and mending fence in the cold January rain. Finally, an idea came to him, risky but possible. He asked Morrison for a private meeting. The old rancher listened to Harold's proposal with a skeptical expression, his weathered face giving nothing away. "Let me see if I understand," Morrison said. "You want me to loan you $300, which you will use to buy inventory for Mrs. Garrett's mercantile, and then you will pay me back out of your wages plus half of any profit the store makes on that inventory." "Yes, sir. I know it is unusual, but Eleanor needs help, and I have nothing to give her except my labor. If the mercantile succeeds, you will make money. If it fails, you can garnish my wages until the debt is clear." "And what is Mrs. Garrett's opinion of this plan?" "She does not know about it yet," Harold admitted. "I wanted to see if you would even consider it before I mentioned it to her." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Harold. "You know, when you first came here, I thought you were just another drifter. Figured you would work a few months and move on. But you have surprised me, Quinn. You are a hard worker, honest with the animals and the other hands, and anyone can see you are serious about Mrs. Garrett." "I am, sir. More serious than I have ever been about anything. Why should I risk $300 on a widow's failing business and a cowboy's good intentions?" "Because," Harold said, choosing his words carefully, "this valley needs people who are willing to invest in each other. Eleanor Garrett is a good businesswoman who has had bad luck. With the right inventory and a little capital, she can turn that mercantile into something profitable. And I am asking you to trust me, knowing I have already paid back $35 to a man in Sacramento who would have been within his rights to have me arrested. I am good for my debts, Mr. Morrison." Morrison was silent for so long Harold thought he had been dismissed. Then the old rancher stood and extended his hand. $300, to be paid back at $5 a month plus half the profit on any goods purchased with my money. I will draw up a contract." Harold shook his hand, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, sir. You will not regret this." "I had better not, Quinn. I am too old to be making foolish investments." Eleanor's reaction to the news was not what Harold expected. When he told her about Morrison's loan, standing in her smoke-damaged mercantile surrounded by half-empty shelves, she burst into tears. "Harold, you cannot do this. If the business fails, you will be in debt to two people. You will be working just to pay off loans for years." "Then we will make sure the business does not fail," Harold said, taking her hands. "Eleanor, you have been carrying this burden alone since Gerald died. Let me help. Let me be your partner in this. Partner, business partner for now, maybe more someday if you will have me. But right now, let me do this for you. Let me prove I am the kind of man who shows up and stays." Eleanor searched his face, tears still streaming down her cheeks. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but we do this together as equals. You put up Morrison's money, I contribute my business knowledge and the store itself. We split the work and the decisions." "Deal," Harold said, and kissed her there among the damaged inventory and the smell of smoke, and it felt like a promise. They spent the next 3 months rebuilding Eleanor's business together. Harold worked Morrison's ranch during the day and the mercantile in the evenings and on Sundays, repairing smoke damage, painting walls, building new shelves. Eleanor traveled to Fresno and Chile to negotiate with suppliers, using Morrison's money to buy the goods she knew her customers wanted at prices that would allow for profit. By March, the mercantile reopened with a celebration that brought half of Porterville through the doors. Eleanor had new fabric, new tools, new canned goods, and a section dedicated to women's sundries that no other store in the area offered. Within 2 weeks, her customer base had doubled. Within a month, she was showing a profit. Harold split his time between Morrison's ranch and the mercantile, often working 16-hour days. He was exhausted, but happier than he had ever been. He was building something real, with a woman who made him want to be better than he had ever thought possible. In April, a letter came from Charlotte, forwarded through the banker in Sacramento. Harold opened it with shaking hands, Eleanor at his side. "Dear Mr. Quinn, I received your letter and your apology. I will not pretend that what you did not hurt me. It did, terribly, and I spent many weeks angry and humiliated. But I have had time to think, and I realize that I was also responsible for what happened. I stole from my father, I pursued you despite knowing it was inappropriate, and I convinced myself we were in love when really I was just desperate to escape my life. I am writing to tell you that I have forgiven you. My father has also decided not to press charges as long as you continue making your payments. I hope you are building a better life than the one you left behind, and I hope you find happiness. I have recently become engaged to a banker's son from San Francisco, a kind man who shares my love of music. We will be married in June. I am, for the first time, genuinely happy. Please do not write to me again. This chapter of our lives is closed, and it is better left that way. Sincerely, Charlotte Whittaker. Harold read the letter twice, then handed it to Eleanor. She read it in silence, then folded it carefully and gave it back. "She sounds like she is doing well," Eleanor said. "Better than she would have been with me," Harold agreed. "I am glad she found someone good. So am I. Does this give you closure?" Harold thought about it. "Yes, I think it does. I spent months feeling guilty about what I did to her, but she is right that we were both making mistakes. I am glad she is happy. And I am glad I am here with you, instead of still running." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. "So am I." That evening, as they walked back from closing the mercantile, Harold stopped Eleanor in the middle of Porterville's dusty Main Street. The sun was setting over the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance, painting everything gold and pink. "Eleanor Garrett, I need to ask you something. Eleanor looked up at him, her face soft in the evening light. "What is it?" "I know I am still paying off debts. I know I am just a ranch hand who helps run a mercantile. I know I have a past that is not pretty, but I love you. I have loved you since the day I watched you tear up Thomas Murphy's debt and show me what real mercy looks like. And I want to spend the rest of my life being the kind of man who is worthy of you. So I am asking, will you marry me?" Eleanor was very still. Then she said, "Do you have a ring?" "No," Harold admitted. "I have been saving every spare penny to pay off Sacramento. I cannot afford a ring." "Good. I do not need a ring. I need a partner, a friend, and a man who will work beside me to build something real. And that is what you are, Harold Quinn. Is that a yes?" "Yes, you foolish, wonderful man. Yes, I will marry you." Harold picked her up and spun her around right there in the street, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he kissed her with every ounce of love he had been storing up. They were married in June 1880, in the same church where they had first attended services together. Thomas Murphy and his wife came, healthy and grateful. Morrison came, gruff, but pleased that his investment had paid off. Half of Porterville showed up, curious to see the widow marry the cowboy who had turned his life around. Eleanor wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Harold wore a new suit he had bought with money saved from mercantile profits. When the preacher asked if they took each other for better or worse, richer or poorer, they both said yes like they meant it, because they had already lived through worse and poorer and come out stronger. The reception was held in the mercantile itself, transformed for the day with ribbons and flowers. People danced to fiddle music and ate cake that Martinez's wife had baked. As evening fell and guests began drifting home, Harold and Eleanor stood together behind the counter where they had spent so many hours working side by side. "Are you happy?" Harold asked. "Happier than I knew I could be," Eleanor said. "Are you?" "Yes. Though I never imagined my wedding reception would be in a store where I once bought work gloves," Eleanor laughed. "Life takes strange turns." "The best kind of turns," Harold agreed. They spent their wedding night in the small house behind the mercantile that had been Gerald's and then Eleanor's alone. It felt right, Harold thought, that they were starting their marriage in a place that Eleanor had made her own, rather than him trying to take over or erase what had come before. Gerald would always be part of Eleanor's story, but now Harold was part of it too, and somehow that felt like enough. Over the next 2 years, Harold and Eleanor built their life together with the same determination they had brought to rebuilding the mercantile. Harold continued working Morrison's ranch half-time, enough to keep earning steady wages while dedicating the rest of his hours to the store. Eleanor proved to be as shrewd a businesswoman as Harold had believed, expanding their inventory and building relationships with suppliers all over California. By their first anniversary, they had paid off Morrison's loan in full, plus interest. By their second anniversary, they had enough saved to buy the 10 acres north of town that Eleanor had almost sold, and they began building a house there, slowly, as they could afford materials. Harold's debt to the banker in Sacramento was finally cleared in the spring of 1882. The day he made the final payment, he showed Eleanor the receipt and then burned it in the stove, watching his past turn to ash. "How does it feel?" Eleanor asked, her hand on his back. "Strange," Harold admitted. "I have been working toward this for so long it feels odd to suddenly be free of it." "You have been free of it for a long time, Harold. The debt was just paperwork. You became free the day you stopped running." Harold turned and pulled her into his arms. "I became free the day I met you." In August of 1882, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled them both in equal measure. They were finally stable, The mercantile was profitable. The house was nearly finished, but bringing a child into the world still felt like the biggest risk they had ever taken. "What if I am a terrible father?" Harold asked one night, lying in bed with his hand on Eleanor's still flat stomach. "You will not be," Eleanor said with certainty. "How do you know?" "Because you know what it is like to make mistakes, and you know how important forgiveness is. Those are the most important things a father can teach a child." Their son was born in April 1883, during a spring rainstorm that finally broke the winter drought. They named him Thomas, after the man whose forgiven debt had set their whole story in motion. Thomas Quinn was healthy and loud, with his mother's brown eyes and his father's stubborn determination. Harold held his son for the first time and felt something shift inside him, a final piece falling into place. He was 29 years old, a husband and father, a business owner and ranch hand, a man who had made terrible mistakes and was trying every day to make amends. He was not perfect, but he was loved, and he was home. Eleanor recovered slowly from the birth, and Harold took over more of the mercantile work while she focused on Thomas. The town women who had once been skeptical of Eleanor running a business alone now rallied around her, bringing food and baby clothes and advice. Mrs. Murphy, Thomas's wife, became a regular visitor, helping with the baby and bonding with Eleanor over their shared experiences. "You saved us," Mrs. Murphy said one afternoon, holding baby Thomas while Eleanor inventoried fabric. "When you forgave our debt, when you showed us mercy, you saved our lives. We would have lost everything." "You would have found a way," Eleanor said. "Maybe, but your kindness made it possible, and look what it brought you." She nodded at the baby sleeping in her arms. "Your Harold is a good man." "He is," Eleanor agreed, feeling a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. "The very best." The years that followed were not perfect, but they were good. The mercantile continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of Porterville's small business community. Harold eventually bought out Morrison's share of the inventory investment and became Eleanor's full partner in the business. They finished building their house on the 10 acres and moved in the summer of 1884, hosting a celebration that brought friends from all over the valley. In 1886, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She was quieter than Thomas, with a thoughtful disposition and her father's tendency to watch everything carefully before committing to action. Harold adored her completely, carrying her around the mercantile while Eleanor handled customers, teaching her to count with dried beans and telling her stories about horses and cattle. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping in the store and asking endless questions. By the time he was 5, he could calculate change for simple purchases and knew the price of every common item they sold. Harold taught him to ride when he was 6, and Thomas took to it naturally, fearless on horseback in a way that made Eleanor's heart stop and Harold swell with pride. In 1890, when Thomas was 7 and Grace was 4, Eleanor sat Harold down at the kitchen table of their house and told him she was pregnant again. "Already," Harold said, then laughed at his own surprise. "I mean, that is wonderful, but 3 children, Eleanor, that is a lot." "We can handle it," Eleanor said. "We have handled everything else." Their third child was another son, born in January 1891 during a cold snap that froze the water trough solid. They named him Gerald after Eleanor's first husband, and Harold felt only peace about it. Harold Garrett had been a good man who had loved Eleanor and built something she could sustain after his death. Honoring him by naming their son after him felt right. Little Gerald was easy from the start, a happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world around him. "He is going to be the smart one," Harold predicted, watching his youngest son track a dust mote in a shaft of sunlight. They are all smart, Eleanor corrected. But yes, this one is particularly observant. By 1895, Harold was 41 years old and Eleanor was 40. Their oldest son Thomas was 12, helping run the mercantile after school and already showing business sense that impressed even Eleanor. Grace was 9, bookish and thoughtful, spending hours reading the primers and catalogs that came through the store. Gerald was 4, curious about everything and constantly underfoot in the best possible way. Harold had not stolen anything in 16 years. He had not cheated at cards, had not lied beyond the occasional white lie to spare someone's feelings, had not run from anything except the occasional angry bull. He worked hard, loved his wife, raised his children, and tried every day to be worthy of the mercy Eleanor had shown him by believing he could be better. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Harold sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the Sierra Nevada mountains purple and gold. "You ever regret it?" Harold asked. "Choosing me, I mean." "You could have married someone respectable, someone without a past." Eleanor took his hand. "I could have married someone boring, you mean. Someone who never made mistakes and never learned from them. Someone who never knew what it was like to be lost and find their way home." "I am serious, Eleanor." "So am I. Harold, you think your past is a liability, but it is not. It is what made you who you are. It taught you compassion and humility and the value of second chances. It made you into a man who treats everyone with respect because you know how hard it is to climb out of a hole you dug yourself. Would I trade that for someone who never struggled? Never." Harold was quiet, letting her words settle into him. "I love you, Eleanor Quinn." "I love you too, Harold." Always. In 1898, Thomas Quinn turned 15 and announced he wanted to go to business college in San Francisco. Eleanor was thrilled. Harold was terrified of his oldest son leaving home but proud beyond measure. They scraped together the tuition, and in September, Thomas boarded a train north with a trunk full of clothes and his mother's head for numbers. Grace, now 12, took over Thomas's role in the mercantile, proving to be even better with customers than her older brother. She had an intuitive sense of what people needed before they asked for it, and the townsfolk adored her. Harold joked that they would have to beat the suitors off with a stick in a few years. Eleanor started sharpening a metaphorical stick, just in case. Little Gerald, now 7, was obsessed with horses like his father. Harold started teaching him everything he knew, taking him out to Morrison's ranch on Sundays to work with the colts. Morrison, now in his 70s and slowing down, took a shine to the boy and joked that he would leave the ranch to Gerald someday if the kid kept showing such promise. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Harold and Eleanor stood together in the mercantile they had built from the wreckage of debt and smoke damage, and looked around at what they had created. The store was full of inventory, the walls were decorated with photographs of their children, and the ledger showed steady profit month after month. 20 years, Eleanor said. "It has been 20 years since I tore up Thomas Murphy's debt." 20 years since I decided to stop running, Harold added. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had run? If you had left Porterville instead of coming to talk to me?" Harold thought about it. "I would have kept running until I hit the ocean or got arrested or died alone somewhere. Nothing good. Everything good in my life started the day I decided to stay." Eleanor leaned into him, and they stood together in comfortable silence, the store settling around them like an old friend. Thomas graduated from business college in 1902 with honors, and returned to Porterville with big ideas about expansion and modernization. He wanted to turn the mercantile into a chain, opening stores in Tulare and Visalia and Hanford. Harold was skeptical, but Eleanor was intrigued, and together they listened to their son's proposals and eventually agreed to back his first expansion. Grace, now 16 and beautiful, had attracted the attention of a young teacher who had just moved to Porterville from Sacramento. His name was William Fletcher. He was 23, and he was respectful, intelligent, and clearly terrified of Harold. Harold approved. Gerald, now 11, was spending more time at Morrison's ranch than at home. The old rancher had indeed made good on his joking promise, putting in his will that Gerald would inherit a third of the ranch, with the rest going to Morrison's nephew in Los Angeles. It was an extraordinary gift, and Harold and Eleanor made sure Gerald understood the responsibility that came with it. In 1904, Grace married William Fletcher in the same church where Harold and Eleanor had wed 24 years earlier. She was 18, he was 25, and they were clearly in love in the way that made Harold simultaneously happy for his daughter and terrified of letting her go. When William asked for Grace's hand, Harold had given him a long speech about respect and partnership that was really just Harold trying not to cry. Eleanor had cried plenty for both of them, watching their daughter walk down the aisle in the dress they had spent months sewing together. "She is so young," Eleanor whispered to Harold during the ceremony. "She is the same age you were when you married Gerald," Harold whispered back. "Exactly. So young." But Grace was happy, and William treated her like a partner, and they settled into a house near the school where William taught. Within a year, Grace was pregnant with their first child, and Harold discovered that becoming a grandfather at 49 was both wonderful and horrifying. Thomas's first expansion store opened in Tulare in 1905, with Eleanor managing the books and Harold helping with the initial inventory. It was successful within 6 months, and Thomas started planning the next location. He was 22 now, confident and capable, though Harold still saw flashes of the little boy who used to count beans on the mercantile counter. Gerald turned 14 in 1905 and was as tall as Harold, with his mother's brown eyes and a way with horses that Morrison said was almost supernatural. He could gentle the most fractious colt, could spot lameness before it became serious, and had the kind of quiet confidence that made men twice his age listen when he spoke. In 1906, Morrison died peacefully in his sleep at age 78. The funeral was well attended, with ranch hands coming from all over the valley to pay respects. When the will was read, Gerald inherited his promised third of the ranch along with Morrison's nephew, who immediately offered to sell Gerald his 2/3 for a price the family could just barely afford. "We cannot ask you to mortgage everything for this," Gerald said, looking stricken when Harold and Eleanor told him their plan. "You are not asking, we are offering," Eleanor said firmly. "This is an opportunity, Gerald. Morrison wanted you to have this ranch because he saw something special in you. We are not going to let that gift slip away because of money." They bought the nephew's share, taking on debt for the first time since paying off Morrison's loan decades ago. But it felt right, felt like they were investing in their son's future the same way people had invested in theirs. Gerald, at 15, became the youngest ranch owner in Tulare County, with Harold coming out of retirement to help manage the operation until Gerald was old enough to handle it alone. In 1908, Grace gave birth to her second child, a son she named Harold after his grandfather. Harold Quinn held his tiny namesake and felt the weight of legacy settle on his shoulders. This boy would carry his name into a future Harold would never see, a future built on the foundation of mercy and second chances that Eleanor had given him 30 years ago. Eleanor, now 53, had gray threading through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She was still sharp as a tack, still managing the books for both the mercantile and Thomas's expanding chain, still the center of their family's universe. Harold looked at her and saw the young woman who had torn up a debt in the summer heat, and also the matriarch who held 3 generations together and loved her more with each passing year. "We did all right, didn't we?" Eleanor said one evening, sitting on their porch with grandbaby Harold sleeping in her arms. "Better than all right," Harold said. "We built something real. We did, together." In 1910, as Harold approached his 56th birthday, Thomas's chain of mercantiles numbered 6 stores across the San Joaquin Valley. All profitable, all running on the principles Eleanor had taught him. Grace and William had 4 children now, living in a larger house near the school and deeply involved in Porterville's community. Gerald had married a rancher's daughter named Margaret, and they were running Morrison's ranch with skill and innovation that would have made the old man proud. The original mercantile in Porterville was still there, still run by Eleanor with help from hired clerks, still the heart of everything the Quinn family had built. Harold walked through it sometimes, remembering the day he had come in looking for work gloves, the day his life had changed direction simply because he had witnessed an act of mercy. Thomas Murphy had died in 1907, living long enough to see his own children grown and his farm recovered from the drought that had nearly destroyed him. At his funeral, his son had approached Harold and Eleanor to tell them that his father had never forgotten what Eleanor did, that it had shaped how he treated his own debtors and neighbors for the rest of his life. "Mercy ripples out," Eleanor had said afterward. "We never know how far these things spread." In 1912, Harold turned 58 and noticed he was slowing down. Not dramatically, just the inevitable softening that came with age. His back hurt more, his hands were not as steady, and climbing onto a horse took more effort than it used to. Eleanor was 57 and dealing with her own aches, though she still worked the mercantile counter most days, joking that she would die with a pencil in her hand and numbers in her head. They had 10 grandchildren now, with another on the way. The Quinn name was well respected throughout the valley. Thomas's business empire continued growing. Grace's children were thriving. Gerald's ranch was profitable and expanding. Everything Harold and Eleanor had worked for had taken root and flourished beyond anything they could have imagined that August day in 1879, when a cowboy saw a woman forgive a debt. One evening in the fall of 1913, Harold and Eleanor sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard while Grace and Margaret prepared dinner inside. The air was cooling, autumn finally breaking summer's grip, and the Sierra Nevada mountains were sharp against the darkening sky. "Harold," Eleanor said, "do you remember what you told me the night you confessed about Sacramento? I told you a lot of things that night. You said you hoped I might forgive you the way I forgave Thomas Murphy. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember." "It was the scariest and most important conversation of my life." Eleanor took his hand. "I want you to know that I did forgive you completely a long time ago. But more than that, I want you to know that you forgave yourself too. You became the man you hoped to be, Harold. You did it." Harold felt tears prick his eyes. "I only did it because you believed I could." "No, you did it because you chose to. I just showed you it was possible." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, while their grandchildren's laughter filled the air, and the smell of dinner drifted from the house, and the life they had built together settled around them like a warm blanket. Harold Quinn had been a thief and a coward, a man running from his mistakes, and convinced that mercy was something other people deserved, but he never would. Then he had watched a woman tear up a debt, choosing grace over profit, and something in him had recognized it as a sign of what he could become if he was brave enough to stop running. He had been brave enough, and Eleanor had been patient enough. And together, they had built a life that proved mercy was not weakness but the strongest foundation of all. In 1915, Harold and Eleanor celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a party that filled the house and spilled into the yard. All three of their children were there with their families, along with friends from Porterville and beyond. Someone made a toast about the mercantile, and someone else made a joke about Harold's misspent youth, and Eleanor laughed so hard she cried, and Harold felt grateful for every single day he had been given to love this woman. 35 years, he said when they were finally alone, the party ended and the house quiet. Where did the time go? Into this, Eleanor said, gesturing at their home, their family photos on the walls, the life visible in every corner. Into something worth building. I love you, Eleanor Quinn, today and every day since the first moment I saw you. I love you too, Harold, forever. They went to bed that night in the house they had built together, in the life they had created from forgiveness and hard work, and the belief that people could change if given the chance. Outside, the San Joaquin Valley stretched out under stars that had watched the Wild West become something gentler, something tamed by people willing to choose mercy over harshness. Harold had been forgiven his debts, both financial and moral. He had learned to forgive himself. And in doing so, he had become the kind of man who could build a legacy worth passing on, a legacy of second chances and hard-won redemption. It had started with a woman forgiving her borrower's debt, and a cowboy seeing it and knowing she would forgive his mistakes too. It had grown into 35 years of marriage, 3 children, 10 grandchildren, a business empire, and a ranch. It had become a story of the Wild West, not of gunfights and gold rushes, but of ordinary people choosing grace and building something extraordinary from it. And it was not over yet. Harold and Eleanor lived to see their golden anniversary in 1930, celebrated with 50 years of memories and a family tree that had grown to include great-grandchildren. Thomas's business chain numbered 20 stores across California. Grace's children were grown with families of their own. Gerald's ranch was one of the most successful in the valley, a testament to Morrison's wisdom in seeing potential in a young boy. On their 50th anniversary, sitting on the same porch where they had spent countless evenings, Eleanor said, "We did good, Harold Quinn." "We did better than good, Eleanor Quinn. We did extraordinary. All because I tore up one debt. All because you showed me what mercy looked like." They held hands and watched the sunset. 2 people who had found each other in the dusty streets of a Wild West town and built a love that had lasted through droughts and debts, mistakes and mercies, until it became the kind of story people told their grandchildren. The story of a woman who forgave her borrower's debt, and a cowboy who saw it and knew she would forgive his mistakes too. The story of choosing to stay instead of run, of building instead of destroying, of loving instead of taking. The story of Harold and Eleanor Quinn, who proved that the Wild West could be tamed not with guns but with grace, and that the best legacy was not gold or land, but the simple, revolutionary act of believing people could be better than their worst moments. And they lived the rest of their days in that belief, in that love, in that mercy that had saved them both and rippled out to touch everyone they knew. They lived until they were old and gray and surrounded by generations of family who carried their story forward. They lived happily ever after, in the truest sense of those words, because they had earned every moment of that happiness through the hardest work there is, becoming people worthy of the love they had been given. The mercantile still stands in Porterville, now run by Thomas's grandchildren. The ranch still operates, still raising horses and cattle on land that Gerald's great-grandchildren manage. And somewhere in the church records, in the yellowed pages of marriage certificates and baptisms, the names Harold Quinn and Eleanor Garrett are recorded for all time, proof that two people once chose each other and built something that lasted. That is how their story ends. Not with a gunfight or a gold strike, but with a porch and a sunset and 50 years of choosing mercy every single day until it became second nature, until it became love.